as well. But Chapter 8 deals more specifically with the actual contract or agency agreements. It means the same thing. Agency contract, agency agreement means the same thing. So the most common example of an agency agreement is a listing agreement. And we talked about that terminology. We said the listing side is which side of the transaction? The seller's side. And then we gave you another terminology, another word. What was that other terminology we gave you? What side? If it's not the listing side, it's what side of the transaction? Yeah, but that's not the word. The buyer's side. What is the word? Selling side. Remember we talked about that terminology? Don't sit there and refuse to use it. I know you don't want to. You have to. When you are talking about the buyer side of the transaction from now on, what are you going to refer to it as? The selling side. When you were talking about the seller's side of the transaction, what are you going to refer to it as? The listing side of the transaction. You need to get accustomed to that terminology. The firm that represents the seller is the listing firm. The firm that represents the buyer is the selling firm. Get real comfortable with that terminology because you're going to have to be for the exam. The most common type of an agency agreement is the agreement that's signed between a firm and a seller client. What do you think the name of that agreement is? What side of the transaction is that? A firm and a seller. What side of the transaction is that? That is the listing side. So what do you think the name of the agreement is that will be signed? It's called a listing agreement. See, I have to ask you these things in like 15 different directions because it all means the same thing. You all make it hard. The seller side is the listing side, is the seller subagent side, is the side that represents the seller. It's all the same thing. A listing agreement is an agency agreement signed between the seller and the listing firm. It's all on this, but it's a bunch of different terminology, and you have to be equally comfortable with all of it because that's how they're going to present it on the exam. They're going to throw those words at you. So any of those words mean the seller's side of the transaction. And the listing agreement is the very basis of what we do. Because remember, we said in the beginning, all real estate brokers represented who? Sellers. So, if you were a real estate broker for 100 years, the only agency agreement you would have ever signed would have been what kind of agency agreement? A listing agreement. It would have been an agreement where a seller hired your firm to sell their property for them. And it's still the basis of our business. Now, one thing you need to know, we've already talked about this, but as a reminder, listings always have to be in what? Writing. A listing agreement always must be in writing from its very beginning. You cannot have an oral listing agreement. There's no such thing as an oral agreement with a seller. Can you have an oral agreement with a buyer? Yes, but for a limited what? Limited time. Specifically, how long? When does it have to be put into writing even with a buyer? No later than what about an offer? Presentation of an offer. Not writing an offer, but presenting one. And who would you be presenting it to? You're not presenting it back to the buyer. Who would you be presenting the offer to? To the seller or, the seller or somebody on the seller's side of the transaction. Does that make sense for everybody? Either the seller or somebody on the seller's side of the transaction. You would have to put that buyer agency into writing before you could do that. Look at this note here on the last bullet point. It says, this is a contract, and you need to correct it. It's not a contract between the buyer and the seller. It's a contract between the firm and the seller. I need to correct that in the slide, and I keep forgetting to do it. A listing agreement is not a contract between a buyer and a seller. It's a contract between a listing firm and a seller. Does that make sense? But the second part of the bullet point is correct. It says neither party can do what? Can fire the other. Folks, contracts don't work that way. You don't fire somebody you have a contract with. You do what? You honor the contract. How do you end an arrangement that with somebody you have a contract with? Either complete the job, or what else? What other ways?
It expires.
It expires, I heard. What else? Mutual agreement. Those would be the ways to end a listing agreement, that type of agency agreement. Not, my listing firm sucks, so I'm going to fire it. It's your fault for hiring somebody who sucked in the first place as a seller. And that works the other way. Do we get to fire clients? No, you do not. This is not what this is about. This is a contract between the two parties. And ultimately, why do we need a contract? Because we expect to get what? Paid. We expect to get paid. This is the agreement that dictates when and how much we get paid. That's what the listing agreement is for. We talked about the fact that buyer agency agreements can be oral and have to be put into writing no later than time of presentation of an offer. Any agency agreement, whether it's a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement, any agency agreement should always specify under what conditions the firm is owed a commission. Now, here's what we need to talk about right away. There is a huge difference between being owed something and being paid something. How many of you have ever been owed money and had a hard time collecting it? There is a gaping difference between when you are owed a commission and when you are actually paid a commission. When are most real estate brokers actually paid their commission? At what point in time? At closing, when documents are what? Recorded. That is not when we have actually earned our commission. Because if you look at most listing agreements, buyer agency agreements, they don't specify that we earned the commission or we're owed the commission when we close. For example, the listing agreement that we look at says that we've earned the commission when we produce a ready, willing, and able. Not one or the other, but what? All three. Is the buyer ready? Is the buyer willing? And is the buyer what? Able. The moment we have produced a ready, willing, and able buyer, the listing firm has earned their commission. So let's talk about that in a real sense. Let's say, for example, that Evilise has taken a listing and she's listed a property for sale for $200,000. That's what the listing agreement says. Listing agreement says her firm's going to be paid 6% of the sales price of the property if they produce a ready, willing, and able buyer who's willing to pay $200,000. That's essentially what her listing agreement says. Everybody with me so far? She puts the house on the market. The first weekend it's on the market, she gets a full price offer from Lynn, who's representing a buyer client. Full price. Cash. Has Evilise produced a ready, willing, and able buyer to purchase that property? Yes. So the seller decides they're not going to sign the offer. They never accept, or do they have to accept the contract? No, they don't have to accept a full price contract. Do they still owe Evilise and her firm the listing commission?
Yes.
Yes, because they have done what they were hired to do. I've had people say, well, what if they decided $200,000 wasn't enough? That's great. Like I said, they don't have to sell it. But is that the problem of the listing firm if the listing firm was hired to produce a buyer willing to pay what? $200,000. Think of it this way. If you hire somebody to cut your grass at your house, and they say, how high do you want it cut? You say 2 inches. And they cut it 2 inches. And then you walk out there and you look at it and you go, I don't know. I really would like it better if it was 1.5 inches. Is it reasonable to expect them to cut it again for you for free? No, because they did what? They did exactly what you hired them to do in the first place. Does that make sense for everybody? So in that sense, has a listing firm earned that commission? Now, having earned it, does that mean they've been paid it? No. And is it going to be hard to collect it? Most likely, because most likely if you just send the seller a bill and say, yo, it's the commission anyway, they're probably not going to pay. most likely the firm would have to do what in order to get it? Would have to sue, and that's a whole different ball of wax. But I need you to understand the idea of entitlement to a commission, because here's the uglier truth. Where did I say the offer came from? Another firm. Is it possible that Evilise had marketed that property saying, if you bring us a buyer, we will pay you X number of dollars or X percentage of the sales price as a commission for helping us with this sale, for helping produce a buyer? Is that pretty likely? Yeah. So let me ask you a question. Not only has Evilise done her job, who else has done her job? The selling firm. The firm representing the buyer, have they also done their job? So, could Lynn and her firm say, you owe us our commission? What do you think?
Yeah.
They did their job, didn't they?
Yeah.
And who is it that owes them that commission? It's the listing firm. It's not the seller. It's not the buyer who promised to pay them that money. The listing firm. So in this case, the listing firm is going to have to make a tough call. Do we pay that selling firm out of our pocket, or do we go after the seller for this money? Because they owe that money to the firm representing that buyer. Because the firm representing the buyer did their what? Did their job. Y'all with me on that? Yes, ma'am.
So, but I know you said that a way to fix the problem would be to sue the seller.
It's the only way.
Yeah, but like, wouldn't that in turn make you look bad?
Of course it would.
Negative news travels a lot faster.
It does, and notice why I said you're going to have to make a decision about that. You have to decide, and by you I mean your firm has to decide if it makes sense to sue that seller. But
with a $200,000 home, it doesn't make sense.
But the follow-up point is, you may not have a choice unless you want to pay it out of your pocket, because who owes that firm to Lynn's? Who owes that commission to Lynn's firm? The listing firm owes that money. Are they going to pay it out of their pocket? Then they better hope to get it from where? From the seller. They owe it. They owe it. In some cases, do they pay it out? Generally speaking, it is very rare for any firm to go after anybody for commission on a transaction that does not happen. However, there are those cases where clearly the person you're dealing with is a scumbag. Are there scumbags in the world? Yes. You're going to run across them, and it will be necessary for you to sue a client. I've never had it, thankfully, but I've certainly known people who did. I had a young lady who was a good friend of mine years ago, and she called me and asked me for my advice on what she should do. And she was a one-person firm, so she was the firm. And she had sold a young couple their house in Cary, had worked with them, helped them out, and then their parents were moving to the area, and they referred their parents over to her. Parents were coming down from New York. And she helped the parents look for a house for about 6 weeks. She'd shown them about 25 houses, and they finally found a house that they had gone under contract on that was about 2 neighborhoods over from where the daughter and her husband and grandchild lived. And they'd gone under contract on this property, and they were 3 days from closing on the property. And she gets a phone call from her client, the buyers. It says, we're not going to buy the house. We've changed our mind. We're not going to buy the house. And she said, is there something going on that I need to know about? You know you're going to lose your earnest money. You're going to lose all this money you've invested. You're going to lose like $15,000 in earnest money and all kinds of money that you've spent. And they just said, we've just decided it's not the right time for us to buy. It's not the right time for us to buy something. We've just decided we're going to rent. That's what they told her. So she did the only responsible thing, which was to terminate the contract for them. Does that make sense for everybody? And of course, the seller of that property is upset, but they terminated, they forfeited earnest money, life goes on. About a year later, she ran across her former client, the daughter, in Crabtree. Saw her in the mall. And she started having a conversation with, hey, how you doing? Oh, we're doing great, blah, 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 blah. How are your mom and dad? Because remember, she did not part on negative terms with these people. Of course, the transaction didn't work out, but she wasn't upset with them. She was upset for them because they lost their money. How's mom and dad? They're doing great. They love their new house. Now, if you had signed a buyer agency agreement with somebody, an exclusive buyer agency agreement, and you had to terminate something that they were under contract 3 days before they close, and now you hear that they bought a new house, is that going to get your attention? Yes. Because if they sign an exclusive buyer agency agreement, who should be representing them on that transaction? You should. And she said, oh, they bought a house. And the daughter just happy to fill them all in. She's so excited. And she said, oh yeah, well you know, I'm sure you know the backstory. And my friend Sarah's thinking, I'm sure I don't, but I'm really glad to hear it. She said, yeah, you know, they came to that party over at my house, and it was like a week before they were supposed to buy the other house. And they just started talking to the neighbors across the street. They were so excited they were moving to the area. And the neighbor said, well, we wish we had known you were thinking about moving to the area because we're about to put our house on the market. You could have bought it from us, and we could have saved a bunch of commission. And so they hatched a scheme. They decided they'd rather purchase the house across the street. Now, this is a free country. You can make that decision, correct? But what would have been the right thing to do? Inform your agent that's what you want to do, that you want to terminate the other transaction because you found a house you would rather what? You'd rather buy. But they knew that the only reason that was the only way that would financially work for them is because they hatched a scheme with the seller, where the seller said, well, if you want to come look at it and you want to buy it, I can sell it to you for 5-6% less than I was going to sell it to anybody else, because I won't have to do what? I won't have to pay a commission. They said, well, it's not going to matter. We still have to pay our agent a commission. And the seller looked at them and said, not if you don't tell them. That's what happened. Would you be hot if you found that out? Well, she was calling me to ask what she should do. But she knows I'm the level-headed one, and I'm always the one that says you have to think about your reputation. You have to do the right thing. And she said, so tell me what I need to do. I said, sue their ass. Sue the hell out of them. And she said, what about my reputation? I said, if they relay that story to anybody, the person that hears that story will think I am dealing with a scumbag. Because it will become very apparent when they relay that story and exactly how it played out, it is not you that was in the wrong, it was them. Does that make sense? Yeah. So sometimes you have to make a judgment call. And she filed a suit. It never even went to court. They settled it. Because as soon as an attorney looked at it on their behalf, they said, what? You owe them the money. You owe them the money. Simple as that. So yeah, there's times it makes sense. It's rare. There are times. Yes, sir.
Okay, so when a homeowner hires a listing firm to sell the house for them, and say that situation, they find $200,000, the firm finds a buyer, ready, willing, and able, and they decide not to sell it, is that, do you have to go through specific means of suing those people, or is that considered a mechanic's lien?
It's not a mechanic's lien. You're not going to place a lien against the property. It's a personal lawsuit.
Okay.
There's no lien against the property for that. You can place liens on commercial property for commissions, but not residential properties. Not at all. Good question. Okay, everybody understands the idea of ready, willing, and able. Now here's the thing. Even if I produce a full price offer, and it's conditional on financing, and 2 days before closing we get a letter that says they don't qualify for the loan, have I produced a ready, willing, and able buyer? No, because what leg fell out from under the stool? Able. Ready, willing, and able. It has to be all three. Yes, sir, Isaac.
So if they terminate their contract and who's there on the enforcement, they earn this money and stuff, who is she able to sue for?
Because she had an exclusive buyer agency agreement that said any property they purchased, she wasn't owed a commission on the one they didn't purchase. Which one was she owed a commission on? The one they did purchase. The one they did purchase. Because they had an exclusive buyer agency agreement that said they would buy a property through her. And here's the thing, they end up costing themselves way more money because if they had been honest about it, if they had come to her, especially in the price point they were in, and said, listen, we just have found another property where we have the potential to buy this thing. What can we do to get out of the one we're under and try to purchase another property? Would she probably have discounted her commission somewhat to offset the pain they were feeling on the $15,000 on the other one? Knowing Sarah, absolutely she would have. It was like a $600,000 house. So we're talking a big commission. Now, would she have discounted it completely? Probably not. But knowing Sarah, she probably would have said, listen, I'll help, I'll discount my commission like $6,000, $7,000 to try to help you out here. I want you to be in the house you want. I know her. I know how she operates. She would have done the right thing. But they never gave her the opportunity because they just what? They just lied. I don't know what makes people like that, but some of them are. No, I cannot elaborate on earnest money, not because it's not a good concept or a good question, because we're not there yet. What I can tell you is a very basic definition of it. What do you think earnest money is?
I just read it.
Well, what do you think it is?
It's money that you put towards the purchase.
To show you're what?
Good faith.
There you go. To show you're serious. So when would you lose it? When you ain't serious anymore, right? When you back out. That's earnest money. And we'll talk much more about the specifics of it, but for right now, that's what it is, right? It's money to show you're serious, so if you don't go through with it, you end up losing it. That's earnest money. To the seller of the first property. It's a big freebie. Big freebie. Okay? Are we good on this idea of ready, willing, and able? Because it's important when we talk about entitlement to a commission, when we've earned a commission. So some things you need to know for test-taking purposes about any agency agreement. Number one, they cannot be open-ended. They always have to have an expiration date. Always. There always has to be an expiration date. They can't be open-ended at all. Another one that will definitely show up on a test. All of your agency agreements have to have what we call a non-discrimination or anti-discrimination clause. We have not talked about fair housing yet, but there are laws in this country called the Fair Housing Statutes, which prevent discrimination against certain groups of people. Now, I use the word discrimination, but I'm going to tell you what it really means. It means you can't discuss those topics. That's ultimately what fair housing laws say. That's the net of fair housing laws. Because when we say discrimination, you tend to have too narrow of a definition, because people can say, well, I wasn't discriminating when we talked about that. If you talked about it, yes, you were. If you talked about that subject, you were discriminating on the basis of it. That's the way the fair housing laws work. So when you see it says we have to have an anti-discrimination clause, and brokers cannot discriminate on the basis of race, religion, color, national origin, gender, handicapping status, and familial status. What does that mean about those topics in a residential transaction? They're off limits, period. Race, off limits. Gender, off limits. That last one, familial status. You know what familial status really is? It has nothing to do with marriage, it has nothing to do with family. Children. Familial status is children. That means children are a protected class. That means children are what as a topic? Off limits in a residential transaction. Period. Yes, ma'am.
So, and I know I'm going to sound silly, but so, some of the neighborhoods they're setting up, they have things on the board, persiflager stuff. It's a not retirement neighborhood, but it's very clear that it's not for people with children.
Uh-huh.
So
there are specific exemptions for those neighborhoods that allow them to exist in that manner. Okay. That is the only one of the... Did everybody hear her question? She said, how can you have these old people neighborhoods? She didn't say that. We call them active adult communities, right? An active adult community where they don't allow children. How can you have those neighborhoods? Those neighborhoods exist as a specific exemption to the Fair Housing Act. Now, those neighborhoods aren't completely exempt from the Fair Housing Act. They're exempt from one protected class. They're exempt from this one. Familial status. They're allowed to say no what?
Children.
No children. But if you're not in that neighborhood, can you say no children? No, let me ask you another question. Can you say great for children?
No.
No. They're off limits. You can't talk about them just like you can't talk about race. Let me ask you the same question with race. And see, I have to point it out with something like race because you'll see how vividly and how quickly you'd say no, but realize that children are treated exactly the same as race. Could you put a sign that says no African Americans allowed in the neighborhood?
No.
Can you put a sign that says we love African Americans in this neighborhood? No, both of them would seem silly, right? You would look at both of them like, what the hell are these people talking about? If children are a protected class just like race is, then you have to substitute children in both of those statements. Could you put a sign up that says no children? That's the answer. No. Can you put a sign up that says we love children in this neighborhood? No, because they're just as much a protected class as race is. That means you can't say it in either direction. Yes, sir, Isaiah.
You said you can't even discuss it, so you like you can't even say that I want to get this house because it's close to my church. It's not
You can say it. The buyer can say whatever they want to say. Can I, the real estate broker, respond to it or engage in that conversation? No. Can a buyer say whatever they want to say? Of course they can. Can a buyer make their decision on whatever criteria they want to? Of course they can. Can I help them with that?
No.
No. That's where the line in the sand is. So if they say to me, I want to be in this neighborhood because it's close to my church, that's entirely appropriate for them to say. What do I hear out of that statement and what do I eliminate from that statement? I want to be in this neighborhood, and then she turns into the Charlie Brown teacher. Want. Because the rest of that has to be deleted from what I hear. Does that make sense? So if they tell me I want to be in this neighborhood, is that a fine statement?
Yes.
If they tell me I want to be in this neighborhood because it's near my church, is that a fine statement for them to say?
Yes.
What do I hear? I want to be in this neighborhood. And that's what I do. Are you with me on that? What I'm not allowed to say is, you should check out this neighborhood because it's also near your... No. Wrong. Because now that's me assisting them with acting on one of these protected classes.
Can you assist them without saying anything?
No. That's called circumventing the laws. And no, you're not allowed to do that either. They have to make the decision. You cannot assist them with anything related to one of those 7 protected classes. Period. Get used to it. Schools are not a protected class. What's schools got to do with these protected classes? Oh, you mean the things that attend the school. See, I can't talk about those. I don't know, maybe you got a 72-year-old that goes to elementary school and you want to know if these are good elementary schools. See, schools are not a protected class, and that's what you need to understand. Are there going to be facts about the property that influence their decision one way or another? Yes, and the facts about the property are fine. It's talk about property, not people. The schools that the property feeds into, that's just a fact about the property. See, what you need to get away from, I know there's power in that receptacle. Hopefully my client also knows there's power in that receptacle. I can't plug it in for them. I can tell them there's a receptacle on the wall. They need to make the connection that if they plug it in, they'll get the power. If they say to me, is this a good neighborhood for kids? I'd say I can't answer that question. Is there anything else you're interested in knowing about the neighborhood? Well, is there a school nearby? Yes, there's an elementary school right across the street. Is there a playground in the neighborhood? Yes, there's a playground in the neighborhood. Are there activities in the neighborhood? Yes, they have a dedicated activity director. Are those all things I can talk about in the transaction?
Yeah.
Yes, but I couldn't answer the original question, right? I have to force them to ask about the specifics that for them makes it, because ultimately, if I answer this question, is this a good neighborhood for kids? And I say yes, who decided what a good neighborhood for kids is?
You did.
I did. Whereas if I say I can't answer that question, and then they ask me, well, is there a school nearby? And I say yes. And they say, is there a playground in the neighborhood? And I say yes. Who's making the decision about is it a good neighborhood for kids? They are. And that's ultimately where we need to be. They need to be making the decision.
But can't you like leave?
Hold on,
I'm sorry.
Get Shannon first.
Oh, my bad.
I was just, I guess, thinking of a way to, if someone asks you about is this a good neighborhood for kids, and you can't answer that question, you can like sidestep it, but you already hit on that. Sidestep it by saying, like, are there great parks in the area, you know, about the schools and stuff like that. So
But the thing of it is, don't start volunteering that stuff.
okay.
They need to ask you. Don't start saying, well, I can't say this is a good neighborhood for kids, but there's a school right across the street. Because essentially what I've done is just ignored the whole intent of the law. And again, make it about something ugly. Make it about something ugly, but just substitute it and say, would it be okay then? If they walk up to me and go, I don't want to be here in any Asian families. Can you help me with that? I'm not going to go, well, there's an Asian market right across the street over here. Isn't that the same damn thing? And it's no more or less of a protected class. See, what you have to tell yourself is to treat all those protected classes the same.
I guess, like, when you see, like, you know, advertising and stuff like that about, you know, I guess, neighborhoods that have like a lot of kids, they say, oh, it's a great park, or, you know, they advertise those things.
That's right. Could I advertise that they're shopping in international markets nearby?
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, that would be a way to not answer the question, but...
But that's not an answer to a question. That's marketing. If somebody asks me the question and I respond directly to it, that's a whole different thing.
Okay.
And here's the thing. You know it's different, but you want to work around it. And that's the thing you got to condition out of yourself. And I'm not picking on you, I'm picking on all of us. We all do it. Because the first thing we think of when somebody tells us not to do something is, well, how can I do it anyway and not get in trouble? No. Just accept the fact that you can't do it. It's not your job to be their mommy. If they want to know what's a good neighborhood for kids, guess what? They're your kids. You figure out what's a good neighborhood for them. Not me. It's not my job. I wasn't there for the beginning of the party, and I ain't helping now. Ain't that the truth, really, though? Not my job to figure out what's good for your kids. You know? And it is hard. I get that it's hard. I'm not trying, but I am trying to rattle it loose in your brain, right? What our role is and what our role is not. Because you're going to be put in a tough position when it comes to these fair housing stuff. You really are. Now, we'll have a big whole discussion about fair housing, but do you understand that this statement has to be in your agency agreement?
Yes.
So whether it's a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement, I know I owe you a question.
No, see, that was the same question. I was
Okay.
going to ask her, can I say but?
Yeah, not really.
Yeah.
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. Well, and that's it. Ultimately, and so there's a nice way to say that. When they say, is this a good neighborhood for kids, here's what I say. I say, listen, as crazy as it sounds, I can't answer that question because children are protected under federal law. But ultimately, I want you to be comfortable with whatever you buy. So if you tell me what about a neighborhood makes it interesting or appropriate for you, then I will help you find that. Does that make sense? See, I can do that because if they'll start to tell me the statistics of what works for them, you passed. Congratulations. That's always worthwhile. Y'all get a Doris ahead. That's always worth stopping by for.
Appreciate you, though.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. First time?
Yes!
Yeah, there we go. That's what we like to hear. There you go. Good job, Doris.
Yeah, it's not easy.
It's not easy, but it can be done. See, that'll pick you up on a Sunday, right? I like to hear that. I like to hear that. And it's always good to see. And people always say, well, I want to know what I got on that exam. I'm like, no, you don't. Because they only tell you what you got if you failed, right? They only give you a score if you fail. If you pass, it just says result, pass. So you don't want to know it. Trust me. All you want to know is pass. That's it. We don't care if you passed by one or if you got them all right. Just pass. That's it. If you know what you made, you did not pass. But we have to have this statement. There has to be some non-discrimination statement because we need to advise our clients in advance. I can't help you with this stuff. Are you all okay with that? Because that's probably going to show up on a test question. The third thing, it says all agency agreements should identify the individual broker who's assigned. Oh, there's a terrible grammatical error in there. Should identify the individual broker who's signing the agreement on behalf of the firm and their license number. We mentioned this in the last chapter when we talked about the Working with Real Estate Agents brochure. Remember we said not only should your client hopefully sign it if they want it's okay, but who should always put their name and information on it? The agent, the individual broker. Put your name, your license number. On everything that's agency related, your name and your license number should show up. So on a listing agreement, if you're signing a listing agreement on behalf of the firm, should you put your name and license number on there?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Buyer agency agreement should have your name and license number on it. Okay, always on any agency related stuff. Now, we can't talk about agency, we talk about a word called solicitation. Soliciting business. You don't have clients unless you solicit. Unless you look for clients, unless you advertise, unless you work to try to find them. They don't just fall out of the sky. Maybe once you get established, you've been around long enough, they fall out of the sky for me at this point because I don't have to solicit for them. But there was a time when I had to beat the bush for every client I found because nobody knew I was involved in real estate. I didn't have a client database. I didn't have that established relationship with people. And that's where you guys are going to find yourselves. One of the hardest things to do when you first get into business is learn how to find business, learn how to solicit clients. Well, you need to understand for real world purposes and for test taking purposes that there's a very real danger to soliciting without paying attention to the law. Because there are laws that govern solicitation. You're not allowed to just do whatever you want to do when it comes to soliciting business. Is everybody okay with that? You can't just do anything. There's limitations on what you're allowed to do here. And the first area that is very limited is the telephone. The National Do Not Call Registry. It's a big deal. Understanding the Do Not Call Registry. I guess I should probably start with the fines. Why? So you understand why it's a big deal. If you violate this law, the fine is $10,000 per call. $10,000 per call for violating this law. Now, you don't want that. Yes, sir. Who is the fine from? The federal government. Federal Trade Commission. Okay, Uncle Sam. Yes, they want their money. They want their money. So what you don't want is to be guilty of violating the Do Not Call Registry. Does that make sense? So what's the one thing that should be your first line of defense before you call somebody to make sure you're not violating the Do Not Call Registry? Check to see if they're on the list. Check the list before you do what? Before you call. Now, if you check the list and they're not on the list, can you call them? Yes. If they're not on the Do Not Call Registry, folks, feel free to call them and harass them all you want to. Because they're not on the list. But for test-taking purposes, it's not going to be that simple. For test-taking purposes, they want to know if you know the exceptions to the rule. And here's what we mean by the exceptions to the rule. We mean, when can I call even if they are what? On the list. Even if they're on the Do Not Call Registry, under what circumstances do I still have permission to pick up the phone and call these people without getting a $10,000 fine? Are you with me on that? And there are 3 exceptions to the rule. Now, I've actually split these slides. This slide's a little bit different than what you have in your notes. The information is exactly the same. I just split it into 2 slides for visual purposes, okay? What you will see is that you'll see this next slide you don't have because the information is on the bottom of this slide for you guys. But it's still the same information. I know you freak out when something's different about the slide. You know, God forbid you have to write something. I know, it's just, or you. But with the Do Not Call Registry, there's 3 exceptions to the rule. And you already have them on your slide there, but let's talk about the 3 exceptions. So these are going to be people, are they on the list or are they not on the list?
They are.
They are on the list, because if they're not on the list, we don't need any exceptions, right? If they're not on the list, can we call them? For what reason? Any reason. If they're not on the list, call them as much as you want to. You don't need an exception. The only people you can't call are the ones who what? Are on the list. So this is a person who is on the list and you want to do what? You want to call them anyway. They're on the list and you want to call anyhow. You can do that if they are one of 3 cases. One of 3 cases, and you better know these because they're going to show up on a test. And they're going to matter in the real world. So the first exception to somebody who you can call even if they are on the Do Not Call Registry is what? What does it say there's the first exception? For sale by owner, but that's not the whole
You
answer.
gotta have a client.
You gotta have who? A buyer. You can call a for sale by owner, but only if you have what? A buyer who's interested in that property. So you're calling them to try to do what? What are you trying to arrange? Not to get them to list. That's absolutely why you cannot call them. Because they don't want you to call for that purpose. They don't want your daggum phone call to try to get their business. What can you call them for? Hi, Mr. Seller, I have what? A buyer who'd be interested in doing what? Taking a look at your property. Would that be okay? That is a reason you can call this person. And are you guilty of violating Do Not Call Registry if it falls under that circumstance? No, you are not. Now, here's what you can't do. You can't change the topic at some point during that conversation to you doing what for this person? Listing their house. And oh, by the way, I'd love to talk to you about possibly me listing your house. No, no, and no. You can only call them for the purpose of arranging a showing for your buyer client. Because presumably, where'd you get their number? They put it on a sign in front of their house. Were they asking you to call? Yeah, but they were only asking you to call under what circumstance? If you have a buyer. In that way, doesn't the exception make sense? It does to me. Everybody okay with that? That's the first exception. Here's the second exception to the rule. They ask you to call them. How does somebody ask you to call them even if they're on the Do Not Call Registry? They filled out a form somewhere, right? They went on the internet and they clicked Get More Information and a box came up. What did that box ask them for? Name and phone number. And they filled it out. Is that giving permission to call them? It sure is. You didn't go hold them down at gunpoint and say, give me your phone number. They did it of their own free will. If they came to one of your open houses and they filled out a form, you got a sign-in sheet there. Here's a classic misdirection from a real estate broker. For security purposes, we have everybody sign in who visits the open house. Well, it is technically for security purposes, but are we going to use it for other reasons? Yes, if they put their phone number on there, is that permission to call them? Sure it is. If they didn't want you to call them, presumably they wouldn't have done what? They wouldn't have given you the number. Now, is it unlimited permission to call them? No, it's good for a certain period of time. And how long does this bullet point say that period of time is? 3 months, 90 days. 3 months, 90 days. By the way, all months have 30 days. You knew that, right? All months have 30 days, so 3 months is 90 days. Everybody good with that? And then the last exception. They are a former client of yours. You actually represented them, meaning you had an agency relationship with them. You had a buyer agency agreement, you had a listing agreement, you had some type of written agency agreement with this person. How long do you have permission to follow up with them on the phone? 18 months, yes sir, Isaiah.
It has to be you or anybody from your firm.
Anybody from your firm, because your firm has the agency relationship. Okay, good question. Everybody hear his question? He said, does that mean 18 months since I personally represented them, or since my firm represented them? What's the answer to that going to be? Since the firm represented them. So, if they were the firm's client, you have up to 18 months to contact them after the transaction ends. Those are the 3 exceptions. So, if somebody is on the Do Not Call Registry, these are going to be the 3 reasons that it's still okay to contact that person even if they're on the registry. Is everybody okay with that? You're going to see those on the test. What's the first one? They're for sale by owner, and you have what? You have a buyer client. What's the second one? 3 months after they did what? They inquired. They asked me to call them. They filled out a form somewhere. And then what's the last one? You could call a former client for 18 months after the transaction. If they are on the Do Not Call Registry and they do not fall into one of these 3 categories, may you call them on the phone? No. If they are on the do not call registry and they are not one of these three categories of people, no, you may not call them. Is everybody okay with that? If they're not on the do not call registry, can you call them? Yes. But if they're on the list, don't call them unless they're one of these three things, and make sure you know those three things for a test. And yes, they will mix up the days, so make sure you know that 90 days goes with them doing what? Filling out the form, and 18 months goes with what? Former client. You think on the test they might put 90 days for a former client and 18 months if they fill out a form?
Yeah.
Yes, those are wrong. Make sure you know which is which. If you think about it, it makes sense. Which one's going to be a longer time period? Somebody who just filled out a form and said, call me, or somebody you actually represented? Somebody you actually represented.
Is this an actual representation of someone that you can sell for, or that the listing expired, or the selling? I mean, the 18 months.
Not sure what you're asking.
Okay, let me do that. The 18 months.
Okay, I got that part. I know what you're talking about there. But what is this person?
Yeah, this person is a person that they're for whatever reason they fell through and they're still on your list.
Why are you saying for whatever reason it fell through?
Well, I'm just saying because if you just sold them a property 18 months ago,
Yeah.
within those 18 months, why would you be calling back to say, hey?
Oh, you don't want to maintain a relationship with your clients?
Okay.
We mean call for any reason. Would you want to call them and say, Happy Thanksgiving, can I bring you a pie? Just to stay in touch with them? Would you want to call them and say, hey, how's everything working out? Do you have any friends or family who'd be interested in buying or selling? There's a lot of reasons you might want to call that client within that 18-month time period. Matter of fact, I would say you definitely need to be calling them and following them up. Okay, so any type of call, if they're on that list, can only be done for one of these three reasons. Okay, good? All right. Other types of communication, this is on the same slide you have right there. This is on the slide that says do not call for you guys. At the bottom. Other laws that affect solicitation. The Can-Spam Act. What type of communication does this law govern? Email communication. So, if you're soliciting via email, it's subject to the Can-Spam Act. Now, the Can-Spam Act is much easier to understand and much easier to follow. It simply says you don't have to worry about who you're emailing to. There's no list you have to check. You have to give them the ability to do what? Unsubscribe. You have to put an unsubscribe link on your email. That's it.
You do have text messages too, and like say stop.
Say stop, right, but you're not tested on text message ones yet.
Gotcha.
Listen.
Does this qualify for the same $10,000 fine?
No, it does not.
What?
It's useless.
It's useless.
It is useless.
Because
There's
I
no
was hoping to
enforcement.
be able to send some threatening emails this evening with my new knowledge.
I would not recommend you do that.
Because I do the unregistered unsubscribe thing.
It doesn't work.
And it works like 30% of the time.
Right,
And they say, well, allow 1 to 19 months for it to,
right.
you know, it's just like,
Doesn't work.
so
There's
what's
no
the-
teeth to it.
So why?
You have to talk to your representatives in Congress about that, because
It's
they
as
pass the law,
useful
not
as
me.
a can of Spam.
Pretty much. Because it has no teeth. The do not call registry has actual teeth. Okay?
That was nasty.
That was actually pretty good.
Spam is pretty good. They like it in Hawaii. They like it in Hawaii. My granddad liked it.
You knew what Spam was.
I don't know why I don't like it. I like hot dogs and bologna and all that stuff. It's all the same thing, right? It's just in a can, right? And it's better than potted meat if you're familiar with that. That is like the supreme. That's like cat food for humans, right? If y'all know what potted meat is? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Like you take it out and it's just like mush, and you mush it out on crackers and stuff. Yeah, that's even worse than Spam. Yeah. No thanks. Pass. Please. Alright. So that deals with the solicitation laws. Now this law is a North Carolina specific law. It is possible to pass a referral to a broker who's not licensed in North Carolina for a transaction that is happening in North Carolina. To pay a referral fee, you need to listen to what I just said. It is possible to pay a referral fee to a broker or firm who is not licensed in North Carolina for a transaction that happens in North Carolina. Where might they be licensed if they're not licensed in North Carolina? In any other state. They have a license, and you may hear that and say, well, why do they allow that? Well, keep in mind, that might work in your favor at some point. Is there a point in time where you might want to send a referral to a broker who's located in another state for a transaction in that state and be paid a referral fee for that? Yes. So it works both ways. So this is when you get a referral from an out-of-state broker for a client who wants to buy or sell real estate where? Here in North Carolina. And so they cannot represent that client because they're not here. So what are they doing? They're referring them to a North Carolina brokerage firm. Does that make sense to everybody? Are they expecting a referral fee to be paid for that?
Kickback.
Yes, they are expecting a referral fee. Now, we allow that. We allow that to happen. They do not have to have a North Carolina license for that to happen, but they do have to have a license where? Wherever they are located. And that's the key. Wherever they are located doesn't mean where they want to be, where they are sometimes. It means where they are. And I'll tell you where they better not be. Here. At any time during that referral process. Because if they walk into the boundaries of this state, from the time that referral starts till the time it ends, they cannot be paid that referral commission unless they have what kind of a license? A North Carolina license. And folks, this is going to happen to you at some point in your career. You're going to get a referral from somebody in South Carolina whose brother wants to buy a house here in Raleigh. And they got a real estate license in South Carolina. And they refer you their brother. And they negotiate with you to pay them a referral fee. You say, sure, I'll be glad to pay you a referral fee. And you meet the brother and you start showing the brother houses. And everything's going great. You go back for a second look at a house that the brother's thinking about making an offer on. And somebody new is in the car. Who's the somebody new that's in the car? The brother who's licensed where? In South Carolina, who's come up to look at the house because he trusts his brother's opinion. His brother's been in real estate for 30 years. And even though it's in South Carolina, he wants his brother to what? To see the property and give his opinion on it. Guess what you got to tell dear brother who's sitting in that car now? You just lost your referral fee. I cannot pay you this referral fee because you are now where? In North Carolina. You're being compensated for a transaction in North Carolina. You physically are standing in North Carolina. You need a North Carolina real estate license, not a South Carolina real estate. That makes sense for everybody? So you got to be conscious of that. Now, people say all the time, well, how are they going to police that? I don't know, and you don't want to find out. So what you do is you just make it clear to somebody. If they're out of state, you've agreed to pay them the referral fee. What do you tell them not to do? Do not come here. Don't drive to south of the border and buy fireworks. Don't go to the beach on the Outer Banks. Don't change planes at RDU. Do you even change planes at RDU? Is there such a thing as changing planes at RDU? I don't know. Don't do that. Don't change planes in Charlotte. A lot of people change planes in Charlotte, right? I'm telling you, the law says don't come to this state at all. Now, again, don't ask me how they're going to police it. I don't know, and you don't want to find out. Your job is to make it clear to that out-of-state broker not to do what? Don't come here. Yes, ma'am.
The only way they would come here is commercial like that, what is it?
If they are working on a commercial transaction and they have obtained the limited non-resident license, but then what do they have? They have a North Carolina what? License. They have a type of North Carolina license, which in this case they don't have at all. And that's the key. If they want to come here, get a North Carolina license. They can come here all they want to. They can come along with brother and look at every single house. Couldn't they? Sure they could, to get a North Carolina license. Can they come look at every single house if they don't get paid the referral fee? Sure. It's putting the two together that requires a North Carolina license. Yes, sir? Okay. Everybody good on that? It's your responsibility to convey that information. And why would the Real Estate Commission have such a rule? What do they want people to do? Get a North Carolina license. They want as many people as possible paying $45 a year. Simple as that. So when you ask yourself, do you think somebody needs a license for that? What's the most likely answer? Uh-huh. Yeah, that should be your starting point. Because they're going to want to make sure, that all those brokers, because here's the thing, if they didn't, folks, if they didn't do it this way, everybody who's a broker in Charlotte wouldn't bother to have both a North Carolina and a South Carolina license. They'd have one or the other. And when they needed to cross the state border, they'd just work out a referral fee with somebody. Wouldn't they do that? But as it is, what kind of license do they have to have if they're going to work in that market? They need both. They need both. Just like up at Lake Gaston, you're going to sell on Lake Gaston, you got to have a North Carolina license and a Virginia license, because part of the lake's where? In Virginia. What are you going to do? You're going to stop there. Nope, you can't go over there. You can't look at that house. I don't have a license over there. Doesn't work very well for the consumer. Okay? Everybody good? Yes, sir. That's what happened on them. Sure, if you're on a border, area. I mean, by the way, I love that he said trying to sell a crib. Like y'all called that, but I did. But yeah, if you're in the Charlotte market, because somebody who's looking in Charlotte, they're going to look at me. If they're looking at Charlotte suburbs, they're just as likely to be looking at Fort Mill, South Carolina, as they are Mint Hill, North Carolina, right? Or it just works that way in border areas. So anywhere that sort of straddles the border, is very close to the border, it's going to make sense to have both licenses. Yes, sir.
Do you have any other license?
Virginia.
Do you have Virginia because of gas?
Because of Lake Gaston. Because of Lake Gaston. And they made me take the class. They did. They did. I had to take the class, and when I took it, it was 75 hours.
So you wasted? You wasted?
Oh, it was not hard. No, it was
easier than the North Carolina.
Significantly so. I thought anyway.
There's still meets and bounds though, right?
Yes, they use meets and bounds. They have different agency laws, and that was, that's a little bit different whenever you start studying a state's different agency laws. That's always the toughest part, is where the differentiations are going to be, how they practice agency, what do they call certain things. Like some states that practice what we call designated dual agency, they call it, gosh, what is the one that I thought was real cutesy? Special agency. That's what I'm like, yeah, right, exactly. And they call, but it's the same thing as our designated agency.
For Virginia, is it also required to be in the classroom for the course, or do they offer online?
Online. Yeah. We're one of the few states that doesn't offer it online. Trust me, that's in your favor. You think it's not?
Yeah.
It's in your favor. If you saw the pass rate for online schools, only about 5% of people who ever sign up and pay for an online class even complete the modules, much less take the test to try to pass the class. So only about 1 out of 20 even. So they got your money, they don't care about you anymore. We fight it tooth and nail, and it's coming. And the people that fight for it will be the ones that hurts the worst. Because what they'll end up doing is pay for the class twice. They'll pay for it online, they'll fail miserably, and then they'll have to come pay me. We know that's what's coming, and that's the reason we've resisted it for so long, but, it'll come. It'll come. Yes, ma'am. You can't ask me that question. Who would you have to ask? You'd have to ask that state. Because you're asking if somebody else can use the license from here in their state. You need to ask them. And I'm not trying to cut your question short, but I'm trying to make you think about licensing the way it works. It's going to depend on what that state says. The question I can answer is what? Can you use other licenses here in what? North Carolina? Because all I can answer the question about is what we do with our license law. What I can tell you is to transact business in this state, you need a North Carolina license. Yes, sir.
Is that not an automatic no, though? Or is it
What do you mean?
possible that there are certain states
Sure.
that accept another state's?
North Carolina is one of those states. You have to have a North Carolina license. You know what it takes to get a North Carolina license? If you have a South Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Tennessee license, you pay $100 and you got one.
Oh, really? Okay, gotcha.
That's exactly right. So what matters is what each state does individually.
So really, I should go to Virginia, where it's easy.
Are you a resident of Virginia?
I should move to Virginia.
There you go. Now you got it. There you go. Now you're thinking. You gotta live there. You can move to Utah. Just do it online. Okay?
And move back.
All right, good with this idea? Okay. All right. Antitrust laws. Again, still talking about solicitation here. Mostly solicitation. What you can do when you're talking about pricing, for the most part. This is a big deal in the real world, and it's a big deal on the test. Primarily because I don't want to see you go to jail. Price fixing laws are federal anti-monopoly laws. Price fixing happens when an entire industry all charges the same thing. Because they've all gotten together and decided if we all charge the same thing, then people will have to what? They'll have to pay it. The idea of a capitalist society is that there should be a healthy level of competition. That groups of professionals should never collude in order to structure their pricing so that everybody charges the same thing. Do you start to understand why this might be a concern for the real estate industry? How many of you think every real estate broker pretty much charges the same thing? Because a lot of them do. That's the truth of the matter. And that's why we have to be especially careful of this, because traditionally we've been one of those industries where it is very common to magically find, if you talk to 5 firms, they all give you what? The same number. 6%, 6%, oh, we charge 6%, 6%, 6%, 6%. And after a while, you start to ask yourself, what? Why does everybody charge 6%?
Keep it fair.
And that is not keeping it fair. That is not. That is the opposite of keeping it fair from the perspective of the consumer.
Oh, man.
And so what you need to understand is exactly how to approach the pricing question in the real world and on a test. Number one, you don't say anything that compares your pricing to another firm's. Oh, well, everybody else will charge you 6%, but I'm only going to charge you 5%. Can you say that?
No.
No. Well, the normal is 6%. Can you say that?
No.
The average in our market is 6%.
No.
No, because I'm not talking about what I charge, I'm talking about what everybody else charges. What should I say? I charge 6%. My firm charges 6%. We charge 5%. Whatever the number is, it doesn't matter, as long as you present it as it is my firm, me, us, not comparing it to what everybody else does. There's no industry standard, there's no norm, there's no average in the marketplace. You can't even say, well, we'll charge you 2% less than the normal firms do. Because by saying that, aren't you insinuating that the normal firms have a set amount they'll charge you? Don't do that. Don't do that. It's always about what you charge. Commissions are always negotiable from the client's perspective. That doesn't mean your firm can't have a set commission. Can your firm have a set commission? In other words, can your broker in charge say, you always charge 5%?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes, they can. They can absolutely say that. There's nothing wrong with that. But what you can't do is present it to the client as, well, that's what everybody does. The client needs to understand that it's your firm that has that policy, and if they go elsewhere, they may get a different what? A different number. That they have the right to negotiate. Does that make sense for everybody? Because people say, well, when you say it's negotiable, I don't see how my firm could have a set number. It's still a negotiation because the client has the right to do what? Say no and go somewhere else and get a different price. So be very careful. Yes, sir, Isaiah. No, the MLS does not, absolutely, NOT, all caps, set a standard for commissions, nor does the North Carolina Real Estate Commission, because anybody who did that would go to prison. And I'm not, when I say go to prison, I'm not kidding. Real estate brokers have gone to prison for this, folks. In South Carolina 10 years ago, 8 commercial real estate brokers went to jail for this. They used to have a weekly little breakfast meeting at Denny's. Bunch of commercial brokers, good old boys network. And they go in there and they'd sit and talk about business and what's going on. And there was a new firm that came to town. And that new firm was charging less than all of them for their property management. They were all charging 10% property management fees. And this new firm was charging, I don't know, 7 or 8%, something like that. And so they continually discussed what they could do to get rid of this firm because it was endangering their business. That if the firm stayed around, sooner or later, the rest of them were going to have to discount their commissions too. And they had worked a long, hard time to make sure everybody was willing to pay 10% because they all stuck together and charge that same 10%. This was the discussion that continually went on between them at their little breakfast meetings. Everybody follow me on this? What they didn't know is there was a retired FBI agent who also ate breakfast there. And overheard these conversations on several occasions and called the Atlanta district office of the FBI and said, you ought to have somebody come listen to these conversations. And they charged every single one of them with felony price fixing. So you have to be careful of that. I'm sorry? I want to say it was like 6-month sentences that they ended up with, you know. And the fines were substantial. It was the fines that were significantly worse than anything. So it is something you have to be very careful of because you're in an industry where bluntly there's not a lot of differentiation in pricing already. I mean, you know, we just have to be honest and say 6% is a pretty dang common number. Right? And so you have to be very careful to make it clear to the consumer. And it's okay that that's a common number because it may be that we all have done the analysis and figured that's where the profitability point is. Right? You know, $100 is a common number for a pair of shoes. Well, maybe because 15 different shoe manufacturers decided they can't make money off of shoes unless they charge $100. The key is to make it seem and make it clear to the consumer that your pricing is your own and not based on cooperating with some, or colluding is probably a better word, with your supposed competition. Is everybody okay with that idea? Okay. Yeah, that's a big one. Let's talk about what you do. Other types of antitrust laws, and you don't have this on a separate slide again. I just split one slide into two. You can add this to your notes here. Something called group boycotting. You might be tested on group boycotting, and I don't believe it's in your notes, so just add it in there. Group boycotting is anti-competitive because you're trying to put somebody out of business. So let's imagine, I'll give you an example here. It says, this new inspector in town is way too harsh on all of her reports on our listings. Let's all agree that none of us will hire her. That way she'll be forced out of business. So if we all get together as brokers and decide we're not going to hire this person because they're too hard on our listings and put them out of business, is that a legal activity? No. It is not. It is not. Can you individually as a broker make a decision that you're not going to hire that person? Yeah. Of course you can. It's when you decide to cooperate or coordinate or collude with everybody else to do that that you have crossed the line.
If somebody asks you your experience with a person, can you tell them?
Yes, absolutely. The question was, somebody asked me what my experience with somebody is, can I tell them? Absolutely, I can say, well, personally, I don't hire them, and here's the reason why. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when you go out of your way to undercut this person's business model because you want to see them out of business. Like blackballing them, which is exactly what they're, and that's also in South Carolina. Not only were they price fixing, they were colluding to put this person out of business as well. You know, how can we get rid of this person? You know, and again, the whole idea is being anti-competitive. You don't want to do that. You might see that on a test. All right. Last note here, and then we're going to take a break, and we'll come back to talk about the different types of listing agreements. Co-brokered transactions. When we talk about them, and one of the things that we're going to talk about in this chapter is splitting of commissions and how to calculate commissions, how to calculate splitting commissions, those kinds of things. Doing that in a co-brokered transaction is a little bit more complex because you're splitting the commission in several different ways. Who ultimately is owed the commission, the listing commission? Which firm? The listing firm. Now, in a co-brokered transaction, generally speaking, has the listing firm agreed that they're going to share that money with somebody? Yes. Who do they share that money with? The selling firm, or the firm representing the buyer. That's what it means for a transaction to be co-brokered. One of the things I want you to understand is that that cooperation is set up within the listing agreement itself. When you look at a listing agreement, there's going to be two commission numbers on there. They're not in addition to each other. There'll be one that says the total listing commission is blank, and you fill in a percent of the sales price. So 6% of the sales price. And then on the next page, it'll say the listing firm agrees to cooperate with firms who produce a buyer by offering them blank percent of the sales price. Well, now let me ask you a question, folks. Can the number on page 2 be bigger than the number on page 1? No. Should the number on page 2 be the same as the number on page 1? Only if you want to work for what? For free. These are not 6% plus we're going to pay another 3% to buyers. If you put 6% on page 1 and then you put 3% on page 2, how much is the listing firm keeping? 3%, because they're keeping the difference. They're keeping what's left over. Does that make sense? When I was a broker in charge, I had a listing agreement come in one time, and on page 1 it said 3%. And on page 2 it said 3%. And I sent it back to the listing broker, and I said, are you just nice? Or do you plan to work for free? No, I'm not working for free. I'm charging 3%. I said, yes, you are charging 3%. And you're doing what with that whole 3%? Giving it away, dummy. Because they thought it was two separate numbers. No, the listing commission includes the whole thing. The second number is going to be how much of that you are cooperating with the other firm. Does that make sense? Now, don't make this harder than it is. On a test, sometimes they might say something like, Travis's firm is listing a property for sale and charging a 6% commission, and they've agreed to cooperate with outside firms who produce a buyer by offering them 2.5% of the sales price. How much commission is Travis's firm going to earn? 3.5. If you're charging 6 and you're paying out what? 2.5, what's left over? 3.5. That's all there is to it. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, good. So let's take a break right there. We'll come back. We're going to talk about the different types of listing agreements.